and welcome everybody to a new episode of Blueprints and Bytes. Ajoy, how are you, mate?
I'm doing great. How are you, John?
I'm doing well. It's funny, I was with a client this week, and they said they'd watched the first two episodes of this podcast, and I was like, "Oh, that's brilliant! What are your thoughts?" They said, "Oh, Ajoy's very good." So I
That's
think
fine.
I've got some work to do to fill in your shoes over here, but this is great. Today we've got a phenomenal guest, a dear friend of mine. Actually, I had the fortune of spending some time with Mr. David Burton. Now, David is the CEO of asBuilt. David, welcome to the show, mate.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thank you for having me. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again, my friend. So, CEO of asBuilt, talk to us a little bit about asBuilt, why you formed the company, what's the itch you're scratching, and tell us all about how you're doing these days.
Okay, where shall we start? Yeah, look, my background's construction delivery. I got dragged up in construction. I then went off in a bit of a different direction, did an MBA, and that opened my eyes up to a bit of technology. So that's really how the business started, was on my thesis I did during my MBA, and saw some practical technology that I thought if we could utilize that, it could really help the construction delivery process. And that's how we got going, coming up 12 years ago now.
And David, can you just give us a little bit of background of what asBuilt does? What are you delivering as part of the asBuilt technology services, etc.?
So asBuilt, when I started it 12 years ago, we were really focused on how we create a foundation for design. So we were using a lot of 3D laser scanning when it wasn't really mainstream, but the business has kind of evolved as technologies moved along. We started the business with a construction background. So some of our early services were leveraging some 3D laser scanning. We then produced models. We were doing fabricating from models, and then really got into mainstream information management. And I'm sure your background coming from industry, a reasonable size projects, there's a fair number of data sets that you're managing, and that's a bit of a skill and an art sometimes. So that's kind of how the business got going. For the last 5 years, our professional services have changed quite a lot, and I think as industry have developed, some of our early services have gone into those companies where they kind of belong, and we've focused more on, I guess, being that digital referee, but we've also built a bit of a product set as well. So we've got a few tools to help us and help our clients also.
I'm thinking, so you talk about digital scanning and things like that. This industry legacy has been, the adoption of technology has been difficult, right? It's not taken off as much as other industries. Can you just opinionate on that? Like, why do you think that may have been, and what do you see coming in the future? Like, do you see a little bit more adoption? Do you see things changing?
I guess technology and construction, it's a bit of an oxymoron. The two don't really go together. We've been trying our hardest for 12 years, and I think there are a lot of things changing at the moment. But look, I think it's complicated for a number of reasons, okay? I think some of my mainstream reasons, I guess if you look at any built asset, there's a life cycle of business case, design, construct, own and operate. Those life cycles, I think, are extremely siloed, okay? So they don't necessarily flow. Industries, and I know the UK government have tried to mandate some things to connect those up a little bit. So there's a little bit of forethought as you go through from design into construction and to hand over and own and operate. So I think that's an issue. The other thing for me, I think if you look at the delivery process of how construction companies operate today, I think that's changed a lot. And especially I don't know, when I was dragged up on construction sites a little bit, there's a lot of self-performance. They owned their own plant. There was kind of a lot more ownership, I think, of the delivery process. Nowadays, I think there's a lot more construction management. So every project, you've essentially got a new team that come to site. So yeah, look, and I think that we're just so siloed. So I talk to our team, we're siloed through life cycle, and then we're siloed as we go down through the different stakeholders as well.
So, David, when we talk about silos, we talk about data being in silos a lot of the time as well. And one of the things that you and I have discussed in the past is the work that you guys have done on the MCG, which is the Melbourne Cricket Ground, where you've taken a physical stadium and you've painted a picture of it using data, right? So you've done the VR, AR piece, and you've made a digital twin of sorts. How prevalent do you see that in the industry today when moving towards a digital twin paradigm versus people just looking at 2D blueprints and going, okay, that's where I see, that's what I see?
Good question, and there's a big answer there. But look, MCG, I think, yeah, you and your background, you love cricket, MCG, it's a fabulous stadium. I'm not sure if you picked up last week with the South Africa New Zealand matches that were going on. There was some good results there. Yeah.
Depending on which side of the coin you're on, there is a good result or not.
But look, the MCG, I mean, the focus there was operation and how could they get data to drive some operational efficiencies and understand what was happening in the stadium. And you're right, data is siloed. But I think once you're in a life cycle, people are doing a better job of managing some of the siloed data. I think a lot of the opportunity that I see is missed is moving from design into construction, and then that foundation of construction into facilities. What we did with the MCG, because we had a standing start, so essentially I think our early discussions, they had some 2D floor plans and that was it. So what we did to start to organize their data and their information was to create a foundational kind of 3D model. Yeah, people call it a digital twin, whatever. It's a 3D database. And what we did there was we connected up a lot of their existing information systems, so it actually meant something. So we mapped their CCTV cameras. On that one, we actually mapped their point of sale devices as well. So all of the data was landing organized on top of the 3D model. And we were using some of the CCTV to do some camera vision around people movement, people density, people counting, some queue times, and then ultimately landing what transactions were hitting their point of sale. So every time everybody brought a beer or hot dog, we knew exactly where that transaction was. And I think you being in the detail and loving your data, looking at a till receipt doesn't really show you the true story. Understanding how many people were there, what the queue input was, so all of these data points leading up to that transaction, it starts to paint a picture. And look, as a business, that's not our major focus. I think we touch the whole of life cycle. And I think where we've got our major wins and go forward is the construction phase. It's kind of where we're at. And I think that's where you have to make the wins today, because you've got to organize that source foundational data so it creates that foundation for people to do other good, smart things on top of it later, which is, I think, what we demonstrated at the MCG.
David, thinking about the AR, VR technologies that you guys are working with, what are some of the challenges that you faced along the way, right? So we talked about kind of the adoption of technology. this using AR VR technologies is still new in this industry. It's been happening for a few years, but it's still kind of evolving. What did you see, some lessons learned along the way?
You got to build trust. I think there's a lot of skepticism in our industry. There's a lot of shiny new toys, and sometimes they deliver value. So look, I think it's getting trust with people. That's probably the first hurdle to get over. Then also, I think because the life cycle in the industry is so siloed, different parts of the industry are very, very cost focused. So there's kind of not really an overall cost benefit, if you like, because how the procurement piece works, people are procured for their little small segment of work. So I think that overarching, we've done it with some really smart clients that I think get involved over the whole life cycle, and they understand that providing some additional services on top of what's procured does provide benefit. We love, we've got a shared VR, which is basically a 360 degree, 7-meter diameter cylinder. So ultimately it's around TV and its foundation, but I've done some amazing things in there where we have a client. We did one hospital project where we did a review out the back of prelim design. So very early kind of concept design, basically gave everybody a look and feel, but a long way to go before we start on-site construction. But having the doctors and nurses and the client and the architect inside this round cylinder, everybody could see each other's face and they could have a conversation, and it was a mechanism to interact with the design. And I remember one of the nurses talking to the architect and going, why on earth would you put a sink there? And I think she used slightly different words to that, but it was just really neat to see. The client basically being able to communicate and interact with the construction and the design team.
So it sounds like what you're doing a lot of is very early on. I don't want to say pre-construction, but kind of in those phases where you're looking at current conditions, trying to get a feel of how things may be laid out. Are you seeing a lot of adoption in the construction phases of doing digital twins for construction? So using the digital twin to actually say, hey, I see clashes here, or I see, this sink shouldn't, like your example, this sink shouldn't be here, it should be there. Are you seeing a lot more adoption of that? And do you think there could be efficiencies if we did more of that?
Look, I think, digital twin, BIM, everything means different things to other people. And there's a lot of jargon that I think a lot of clients and stakeholders don't really understand. They talk about the BIM. We've got a 3D model, so we're doing BIM. It's a combination of technology and making it really practical for what you're trying to solve. And I think different asset types require different approaches to technology. And then ultimately, different clients and stakeholders are more adopting of technology. So look, I think it's not a one size fits all. Our feet firmly sit in the construction phase. It's where we've come from. And I think it's where we're really focused on helping that whole supply chain deliver. Like I think there's a lot of smart main contractors or GCs, as you call them over in your neck of the woods. And I think people are starting to realize that to actually improve their business, it's not just focusing on their business. They need to also help and provide some fabric for their whole supply chain, because ultimately it's a massive team that goes into delivering these projects, and you really have to figure out how I provide that connection to my supply chain, and yeah, that's probably where we're really focusing our efforts at the moment. And it's interrogating the spatial models a lot more, but really trying to organize the supply chain to the 3D model. So we can kind of see the processes that they do today. If I rewind a step, a lot of technology that's come into our industry has been very much about digitizing the form. Okay. And I think that's created some great easy wins, but it's not how we're going to transform this industry. So look, I think what some of the focus we've got is how we take some of those existing processes and make them smarter. So like we did at the MCG, we're doing in construction. So if somebody's using a QA app or a QA process, we land and organize that data so it actually means something. So there's a lot of how do we connect up their supply chain? How do we have these data threads, or if we fancy it up a little bit, they get called golden threads, another jargon in our industry at the moment. But how do we provide some foundational benefit to the guys delivering the job?
You do see, advancement. People are starting to adopt, but it's a slow process, and I think that's kind of what I'm also seeing. Would you agree?
It's speeding up, and I think this AI term, another bit of jargon that our industry is starting to come to grips with. They are actually starting to see improvements in their day-to-day lives, that they can foundationally see another step change in other industries, that they're just being left behind. But look, you can't magically wave a magic wand and voila, our construction delivery company is ready for AI. So we've got to kind of, again, take a step back. How do we get you ready? Because I think, again, there's ways of using AI that, hey, on the surface, look, we're doing some AI. Isn't that great? But you got to go back and have this. What is our plan? What is our foundation? How are we going to build this competence into our business? It's not just sprinkling a little bit of AI on top.
Yeah, I think that's great. How do you build the competence into your business, right? So I think I want to touch on something, Dave, that you mentioned earlier, right? You were brought up, dragged up, using your words, right, in construction, and then you got an MBA. So you found a way, and you've spoken about technology in every single step of the way, in terms of the company that you founded, in terms of the industry that you're playing in terms of AEC. And now we're talking about AI. One thing that I see, that common thread, is that you've been very, very lockstep with technology and very purposeful in applying said technology to your offerings. Where do you see technology going, right? So AI is everyone's thing. And like you're saying, right, the veneer, the window dressing will get you sort of an ooh and an ah. But how do you see the trends in terms of how asBuilt is continuing on this lockstep with the technologies that are available and the technologies that you choose to integrate into your offerings? How do you see that going forward, mate?
It's quite interesting as the business grows, because we really started as a service business, and now I think we're probably slanting a lot more to, we're a product technology business now. Some of the products that we've been developing, so I think, Jon, you're aware of some of the stuff that we've done at the MCG. We've been working on some rather large projects in the Middle East. And it's what we're focusing on is the commercial framework of how all of the stakeholders work together and do business. And ultimately in construction, people have to turn up on site and deliver something. Nowadays, how they do that is changing in some places clearly not, like with some off-site fabrication, some smarter methods in MMC. But yeah, look, I think you got to get back to the foundation and the roots to be able to drive this change that construction is needing. And I think there was an environmental piece that we did with Microsoft a couple of years ago around before we can improve, we've got to do the recording piece, and then we can report, and then we reduce/optimize. A lot of people are talking about optimizing straight away, but we've actually got to take a couple of steps back in how we create the platform for this next change in our industry.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And how difficult is that? Candidly speaking, it makes for a good talk track in terms of sustainability, in terms of putting a common data platform in, for argument's sake, right? But how do you see it playing out in the real world in the industry today in terms of the construction business? How open are these operators to that change?
I think it's hard. It comes back to that trust again, especially in the world of construction delivery. In New Zealand, Australia, the UK, China, main contractors operate on very small margins, and some have been going through some tricky times out the back of COVID. So I think you've got to be able to demonstrate real wins quite quick. Like I don't think our industry is ready to go into a 24-month investment cycle before they see any returns. So we've got to take them on a breadcrumb approach to some small changes that deliver wins, and that goes back to this foundation. How do we organize your business? So we'll do a little something for you. You will see benefit. You will realize that benefit, and then we'll do the next piece. And there is quite an order to being able to do that.
Can you dive a little bit into what do you see coming next, right? So you're already at this place where you're using some pretty cool technology to deliver value, right? With VR, AR, scanning. Where is this evolving? Where is this going?
There's a lot of really neat technology out that has been available for a decade and that's not being used. And I think there's going to be more exciting technology next year and the year after. The bit right now is adoption in people and getting some real wins. So it's not about the technology, it's about the implementation and how we take people on the journey. To use an example, Leica Geosystems, you both be aware, they provide some pretty amazing survey equipment and measuring devices. We were using some of their early scanning technology 12 years ago, and the rate of change in that equipment has been quite amazing. But look, the biggest change I saw in their technology, it wasn't the fact that it was going 10% faster or having 10% greater accuracy. They got the biggest wins, and I think timeframes on site sped up 50%-ish through considering the workflow. So how do I actually look at the person and how they interact with the technology? And I think that's the thing we need to focus on our industry at the moment, because it's complicated. It's not technology in one business. It's basically on a construction site, there's 100 different companies delivering. So how do I drive that workflow, that change management into my supply chain?
Now, that's something that I've heard a lot, and not just in the technologies you're doing, but across the board. Adoption. That's the user experience and adoption is what I'm hearing a lot of across the board, across many different technologies. So this is awesome. Thank you so much. This has been really insightful. I think there's a lot happening in this space. I see asBuilt in the news quite a bit, and I want to thank you for your time, for joining us and speaking with us and sharing your insights.
Yeah, lovely to chat, and look forward to meeting you in person shortly.
Yes, indeed. I want to echo that, Dave. I mean, we're just scratching the surface here, not only what asBuilt can deliver for this industry, but also what technology means, right? And I love what you said. I'm just going to reiterate it. It's not so much about technology availability. It's about technology adoption. So I think that's something we're both on a quest to do and to help drive efficiencies within the AEC industry. So again, thank you very much for your time. I know that you're a busy man, so we appreciate you taking some time out of your day to speak with us, mate.
Great. Thanks, John.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for listening. If you'd like to be on the Blueprints and Bytes podcast, drop us a line, drop comments, and tell us your views on this. And for everyone, please subscribe, and we'll speak to you next time. Thank you.